Now excited to be joined by a very special guest. It is the next round's Lance Taylor, the founder of Lance's Lock, the place that, look, everybody should go. You're looking to get a little bit of skin in the game. You need somebody that's been in it from all different varieties of gambling. We were just talking about this before you came on. I had no idea, Lance. Before we dig into your over-unders and stuff, we're going to talk college football bets and all that stuff. You used to be a bookie in Tuscaloosa?
Yeah.
How did I not know this?
Well, I mean, I think it was public knowledge kind of around here where you originate out of Birmingham, and I'll still run into people. Hey, man, you took my money back in 1997 or whatever. I started out as a freshman in Tuscaloosa as a very bad gambler, and I loved to play 3-team parlays because I was like, I'll play a $25 parlay. And the 6-to-1 return on that's pretty good, not knowing that it's almost impossible to really hit. Very difficult to hit one game, Connor, much less three. So after losing my money that entire fall, the next year I was like, you know what? I got with a couple of guys. I was like, let's put all of our summer money that we've earned working at home or working from restaurants, landscaping, whatever it was. Let's book and let's see how this thing goes. And I'll be honest with you, we never had a losing season ever. That's how hard it is to gamble and win. We got some tricky spots in 2003, and this is when I was gone from Tuscaloosa. I was actually working at WJOX. I was in Baton Rouge for Dennis Franchione and Nick Saban. And I'll never forget, I got a call from my younger brother. He said, everybody is on Alabama in this game. And I think Alabama was like a 3-point underdog. And I remember I was actually at the game in Tiger Stadium. It was one of the coldest experiences ever. But he called me up and he's like, based on these numbers, if we don't throw this off, and I was a guy that was always against throwing off, we're going to have to close down shop. And I felt great about LSU. I was like, I love LSU plus the 3 or minus the 3, whatever it was that night. And one of my other partners was with me at the game. We were like, we're not throwing off. And Alabama won the game. I think it was 24-0. And I just remember heading back to Bourbon Street that night, and we were like, I don't know what we're going to do. And we found a way. We took out some loans. We were able to pay that off. And we got the same situation like a year after that, and we didn't throw off. We ended up winning that one. But that was the only time it was really, really tricky where we almost went out of business.
My head just went to rounders of that moment, which is
I
just
never
an
dealt
all-time.
with a Teddy KGB though. I never was on the, and that was kind of the thing about it. Like organized crime, they're big into gambling and racketeering and everything. But with that level, I did have some pretty amazing ways that I did things though, which I don't know if we want to get into that, but it was all on the up and up. And everybody was gambling, and it was a way to make a little extra money back in the day.
Okay, so the craziest way you had to collect.
Okay.
Is there?
So
Obviously, you're not gonna name names.
yeah. And I've never told this story before, and it's funny. We just don't ever really talk about it up here. I really don't care. I think statute of limitations is probably up. But there was one of my former counselors who's now retired. She worked at the University of Alabama. She would give me class schedules. So if I had a guy, because this is back before cell phones, so this is mid to or early to mid 1990s. Like I don't know about you. My first cell phone I think was 1998 maybe. So we didn't have cell phones at all, and so there was. If you called somebody's home phone, they were obviously screening it. They weren't there, whatever. So she would give me, hey, he's going to be in the biology building, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 12:30 to 1:45 or whatever. I'd show up at class. I remember, and by the way, there was never any violence. There was some talking sometimes, never any violence. But I remember at Galette's, a lot of people are familiar with that place. The Pikes would hang out there on Friday afternoons. And when there were Pikes that owed me money, I would just go to Galette's, and I would be like, you're drinking and shooting pool in here. Let's go to the ATM. And 99% of the time, it wasn't a problem. I was just one of those. Persistency was the easiest way to collect. And that's one of the reasons I think I've had success in sales. Not afraid to ask for money. And especially if it's my money.
That's incredible. So wait a minute. Let me. I feel like we should just do a separate podcast about this. But
we can. I'm good with it.
So if you're talking about the ways, and remember, this is before all these states had legalized gambling and stuff like that, before it became such a mainstream part. It's kind of crazy to think that ESPN Bet is now a thing. There are so many different ways into it. But like you being this physical presence and just essentially stalking an area to be like, you owe me my money, man. I still can't picture you in that role. And maybe that's just because I've only known you for the last, what, like 3 years. But you, like in that role, like, did you have a specific outfit you would show up in and be like, "I mean, business. We're gonna do this."
I will tell you, it was funny though. So when I left in '95, I kept it going, and I moved from Tuscaloosa to Birmingham, where we are now. But I remember towards the late '90s and into the early 2000s, when I would go to Tuscaloosa, and I had a couple of different guys before my younger brother ended up going to school there, and he took it over for a few years. I had some different guys at different fraternities, and I would go in town once a week. And the way it worked is we collected on Tuesday, we paid out on Thursdays. So normally I would go into town on Wednesday or Thursday, and I would get with certain guys and get all our money that was owed and find out what wasn't. And problems that they had, I would go set up meetings with those people and go meet with them. And I do remember there was a time where I guess me at 30 looked a lot different than a 20 or 21-year old. And I do remember wearing like the Carlitos Way leather jacket and just, having them sit in my car and just talk to them about, like, I didn't force you to, put $100 on Clemson that led to you doubling down on the Vikings on a Monday night, and now you're down $2,000. It's not my problem. I always ask them this question: if you won the 2,000, you came on Thursday and expected to get paid, right? And they're like, absolutely. Well, I expect you, now that you've lost this, it works both ways. And most of the kids were really good about it. I had one kid, and another thing, I would get their phone numbers. I'd always call them over Christmas break, because a lot of these kids, some wouldn't come back. They would disappear after that first semester, because college football was where it was, where we made the majority of our money. But I remember getting this kid's number from somebody else that worked at the university. And boy, how bad would the lawsuits be if all this stuff really, really came out? But I got this kid's number and I called him, and his dad apparently was an FBI agent. So his dad calls me back, and his dad's like, you need to forget. And I still remember the kid's name. I remember the amount he owed. You need to forget my kid ever gambled with you, or I will have your operation shut down. And I remember telling him, and I wasn't being a smart ass, but I was like, what kind of lesson are you teaching your kid that he owes this money? And now you, in working for the government, you're going to threaten to shut down the operation. I was like, I'll back off, but I think it's a bad lesson. But I had a lot of those. And I had one of my, well, I say there was never violence. I will say I had a guy when I was once out that went to collect from me, and he happened to hit some kid that was obviously a big cokehead, and they ended up having a pretty bad altercation. And that was one of the reasons I told you earlier, one of the reasons I got out of the game. But when I was on my way back from the beach, it was in early June, I think it was. And this money was from the fall before. But my guy called me and he's like, hey, this dude went to his place to collect. He basically whipped my ass. And I was like, well, when you've got your collectors, your enforcers that are getting beat up by college kids, probably time to shut it down.
I think that's for the best,
Yeah,
probably.
yeah.
And
And
instead of
I'll
you
tell
trying
you
to
this:
get
so all the money I made, I basically turned around and lost it. I mean, it was the you always hear that the drug dealer don't get high on your own supply. I was the bookmaker that would, knowing better, why not just count your winnings? I would still sit there and gamble it all away. So it basically was coming in one hand and going out the other.
what a perfect way to set you up for this, talking about your the Lance's locks of the year. We can call these locks of the year because you have overs and unders that you love, that you sent me these yesterday. So I want to just dig into all these. You've got 5 favorite overs and 5 favorite unders that you like. Let's start with the overs that you love here. And I'll push back on you a little bit because that's what we do whenever we're on one another's show or something like that. So you have Nebraska over 7 wins, SMU over 8 wins, Miami over 9 wins, Virginia Tech over 8 wins, Auburn over 7 wins. Let's start with Auburn. Let's start in your neck of the woods here. I have Auburn going 8-4, so I'm on board with you on this one. Why did that number of 7 wins stand out to you? And please just tell me because you guys went golfing with Hugh Freeze and you're feeling the good
Yeah,
vibes.
that was not it. I am a Hugh Freeze fan. I thought it was a really good hire. You know, when a lot of Auburn fans believed it was going to be Lane Kiffin. Once it was Hugh Freeze, I was like, I think you got the better end of the deal. Now that's hard to say with, you know, Lane Kiffin coming off an 11-win season last year, but I do like Hugh Freeze, and the number is actually 7.5. And I think when you and I talked about that, they try to put a hook on a lot of these where you won't have the push situation. I do think we have some hard numbers, but the Auburn number is 7.5. You go back last year, it was 6.5, and how they didn't get that 7th win with New Mexico State and the Alabama game. I mean, that was, you talking about a bad beat. If you had a ticket on the over 6.5 last year and Auburn goes 6-7, but I look at Hugh Freeze and I think he's a really good coach. And I don't know where you fall on Hugh Freeze, but in year 2, I think great coaches make big time jumps. And you look at Hugh Freeze in his year 2s at Lambeth, he goes from 8 wins in year 1 to 12 wins. Ole Miss just 7-8, so just a 1-win improvement. But Liberty goes 8 wins to 10 wins. No LSU, no Ole Miss on this schedule. I think they're going to be favored in 8 or 9 games. There's some big swing games: Oklahoma at home, at Missouri, at Kentucky, A&M. 5 straight home games to start the season. They really need to, I think they've got to be 4-1 coming out of September to get this number, but I fully expect them to be 4-1 coming out of September.
Yeah, that Oklahoma game is huge. Yeah. Really, really big for that over-under. You're buying the Miami hype. Why?
I love me some Cam Ward. I mean, you think about the great story, and, I told this the other day. I was doing a podcast for Lance's Lock, and, this is a kid that only averaged 14 passing attempts his senior year in high school. They were running the old wing tee offense. And so he didn't get offers. The Incarnate Word is the only offer he got. And once he gets there, he completely blows up. And you're talking about a guy that's got almost 14,000 career passing yards, 119 total touchdowns. You bring in Damian Martinez, a running back a lot of people don't really know about that played in that Jonathan Smith grinded out offense. I think he's going to be a physical presence, taking a little pressure off of Cam Ward. And year 3 for Mario Cristobal, I don't know how you feel, Connor, but this guy is 12-13. And you go back to the 7-6 last year, 4 of the 6 losses were by 1 possession. I just think they're going to be so improved. They could be favored in up to 11 games. They've got major swing games at Florida. That's going to be a massive one because I know we're going to get the Gators in a little bit. Virginia Tech at Louisville and Florida State. But I think this is going to be a really good Canes team. I expect them to win 10 games this year. I think they got a good chance of going to a college football playoff.
If they lose that one in the Swamp, though, that might be your game of the year because we'll get to Florida with the unders here.
That scares me because when I try to project, and a lot of times they'll be like, "Hey, what is that number going to be coming up?" And I did see an early number, and I think Miami might have been a 1, 2, 3 point favorite. I fully expect everybody will be on the Miami Hurricanes in that game, and Florida might be a little better than advertised. I mean, the schedule is completely brutal, which we will get to. But yeah, gotta get that game won. It's massive.
The first one you listed here, Nebraska over 7 wins. That feels I've talked about my time spent in Nebraska, my 2.5 years there, and it's changed my perspective certainly on just college football as a whole and understanding the way that certain teams are talked about when they're on the rise as opposed to others. But getting to 7 wins, getting to 8 wins actually is what you're talking about here.
7.5 is the number.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be worried about that from a betting perspective, just because the variability of having a true freshman starting quarterback who's probably going to have some ebbs and flows, as decorated as Dylan Raiola is, and then Marcus Satterfield as an OC is maddening in my opinion, and that's for a team that's got 7 consecutive losing seasons. This has to just be faith in Matt Rule, that Matt Rule is going to take, just like you talked about with Hugh Freeze, that year 2 jump.
Yeah, it's in Matt Rule we trust. You look at Temple, 2 wins to 6 wins in year 2. Baylor from 1 win to 7 wins in year 2. And I think you're going to get that kind of jump. 5-7 last year. I think when you look at this, they could be favored in their first 7 games. I think eventually they could be favored in 8 or 9 games this year. True freshman quarterback. But you go back, you look at the offense. I think we would all agree maybe the worst offense in the Power 5 was Iowa.
Yep.
But I think there was only like a 2 or 3 point differential between this Nebraska offense. And, they've got a tough close. You got to make hay early because they close at Ohio State, at USC, Wisconsin, and at Iowa. So if you hadn't gotten this done by, late October, you're probably in trouble. But I do like the over 7.5, and it really is about Matt Rule.
You're just gonna be sitting there watching these one score games, just pulling your hair out. Get ready for what was it like 3-21 in one score game? Tom Fornelli had that stat of like all the one score game. Nebraska just can't win a one score game. It's impossible.
It's so painful. And I'll tell you, another big game early on is Colorado, because you go back to Colorado last year, and Nebraska just couldn't do anything offensively against that terrible Colorado defense. And they hung around in the first half, and then Colorado ended up pulling away. I fully expect Nebraska not only to be favored, I think they beat Colorado in week 2, which I know we'll get to Colorado as well here.
Okay, let's talk about those teams. Your favorite unders here. You have Mizzou at under 9 wins. You have FSU at under 9 wins. UNC under 7 wins. Earmuff at Jeff Collins. Colorado under 5 wins, and then Florida under 5 wins. Let's start with Florida because, again, like the opener against Miami is really important, and under 5 wins, I don't think there's any question. Billy Napier would be gone in that scenario. They would pay that buyout. I guess I slightly disagree with this just because I have Florida going 6-6 and actually starting 5-0 to at least get to that not necessarily breaking through just yet. But tell me where you're at with the Gators, besides just the fact that obviously the schedule is incredibly daunting.
Well, you go back last year, Connor, they were 5-2 to open the season. They lost 5 straight. So they're sitting at 5-7. He is squarely on a hot seat. This is one of the more difficult schedules we've ever seen in the history of college football, at least going into a season on paper. The total is actually 5.5. I go back last year when we were at SEC Media Days and you joined us, in our room and we talked about a lot of different things. And I remember talking about Graham Mertz. And I remember specifically talking to Jacob Hester about this kid. And a lot of people believe going into last year when you ranked 1 through 14 in the SEC, a lot of people believe based on what we didn't see at Wisconsin that Mertz maybe was number 13 or 14 in the pecking order.
I have
and he goes up. He completes 73% of his passes, only turns it over 3 times. And they still go 5-7. They could be underdogs in 9 games. I'm going to say they're going to be favored in 5, and 7 games are going to be underdogs. Major swing game, as we mentioned, against Miami to open it up. They go to Mississippi State. I know Jeff Lebby, year 1. I still think that's a losable game. Central Florida at home, losable game. Kentucky, really tough swing games. I've got them at 5-7 again, which I think probably gets Napier fired. But the Miami game is the one to circle. I mean, we're putting a lot of long-term season tickets on the line in week 1 when you go under Florida and over Miami.
Yeah, that's what this is all going to come down to, that game, which is just going to be sweltering. I don't imagine you're going to be in person for that one when it's probably going to be like 99 degrees at kickoff.
Yeah, I don't know about you, man. The older I get, the more less likely I am to attend a game. I probably go to 2 or 3 games in person a year. I'd rather sit in the AC, watch a bunch of games on TV, and not worry about it. But not a chance in hell. I've been to the Swamp 5-6 times. Way too hot.
I got into a fight with my brother about this because he's like, man, like you need to be able to tough through the weather. Like, I would go to a game at Lambeau or Buffalo or something like that. I'm just like, I don't know, man. I don't want to pay that type of money to be uncomfortable and wanting something to end. And I'm not the biggest guy in the world. I can't necessarily stomach ridiculously cold weather. And it's same on the other end. Like when it's squelched, it's just that brutal Florida heat that time of year. Like, no, I'd rather just sit at home and watch all the games as opposed to just that one and be uncomfortable doing it. So, yeah, right there with you on that one.
Yeah, and I do think if I'm going the hottest, I said the coldest I ever was, and I really believe was in Baton Rouge for that Alabama, that November game where Dennis Franchione beat Saban 24-0, I think was the final score. But the hottest I've ever been, I think, was a Florida-Tennessee game in the Swamp. And it's just like add 20 degrees on top of whatever it is in Gainesville in September.
The Swamp is the most appropriately named sports venue there possibly is.
It really is.
It really is.
It really is.
Okay, Mizzou, under 9 wins. That's not going to go over very well with our crowd. That fan base in general is feeling good right now. And Eli Drinkwitz himself is feeling really good because obviously you're coming off of a 10-2 season with tons of offensive firepower returning, in my opinion, best returning player in the SEC in Luther Burden III. And the schedule is really favorable. So that's going against public money probably, I would guess. Are you not necessarily a drink guy, or what's pushing the under for you?
I've said this, I've kind of given this analogy about Drink. He looks like the guy where the wife and kids are walking up the boardwalk in front of him and he's carrying all of the sand buckets and the beach chairs and he's burnt.
He's a dad. Yeah.
And he's just getting bossed around. He's henpecked by that wife. But you look at Drink, 5 wins in 2020, there was no expectation. Then 6 wins, and then they bust out with 11 wins last year. Now that number really has ballooned up to 9.5. Last year, 2023, their win total was 6.5. They flew over with the 11 wins. Now it jumps 3 games. And I just don't know if they've got staying power. I agree with you on the schedule. I like Brady Cook. I think he's a really, really good quarterback. We did our top 5 quarterbacks returning in the SEC. I had him number 5. I agree with you on Luther Burden III. I think he is the best player in the SEC, and I think he could have just an incredible year. But you look at the schedule; they might be favored in 10 games. They go to A&M and to Alabama; those are games they won't be favored in. But the swing games: Auburn, Oklahoma, and at South Carolina. I just think Missouri's going to trip up and lose a game they shouldn't. I think worst case they're 8-4. I've got them at 9-3, and I play the under just because I don't think Missouri can handle the expectations. And this coming off 11 wins last year with what they've got coming back offensively, their expectation is college football playoff or bust.
As it should be. I agree. And I still was asking those same questions and had them going 8-4. So I'm right there with you on that one. I think you're the most anti-Colorado person that I know.
I thought that was Tom Luganville, at least last year. Deion went after him.
Yeah.
It's not that. I thought it was a great story last September. And by the way, their win total last year was 3.5. They actually went over the 3.5. But they start 3-0. They were the story of college football, and then they lose 8 of 9 coming down the stretch. My thing is, Shedeur Sanders is a great quarterback, and especially when you watched him last year, Connor, because this guy threw for over 3,000 yards, 27 touchdowns, only 3 picks, but he was sacked 52 times. How he survived the season last year is a miracle in itself. I know the offensive line is going to be a little bit better, but I think the Big 12 is going to be much better than advertised. People are talking about the ACC is going to be better this year. I think when you look at the Big 12, I think Utah, Kansas State, Kansas, and Oklahoma State all have a legitimate shot of winning that conference. I think all are really good teams. They better win early when you look at this Colorado schedule. And again, Nebraska is going to be a big swing game there. But they go to Texas Tech. They've got Utah at Kansas, Oklahoma State, but circle at Nebraska. Again, for me, because I've got Nebraska going under and Colorado going under and Nebraska going over. Week 2 in Lincoln is a big game for me.
Here's why you're great at what you do. When I came on with you guys a few months ago, I think the first thing you asked me was who will have more wins this year, Colorado or Vandy? And I laughed you out of the room. And I was like, how could you say that? Blah, blah, blah. And then you're like, no, think about it. And look at the schedule. And then you kind of look at the schedule and you realize a couple of the gimme games that Vandy has that Colorado doesn't necessarily have. And I thought about it more and more. And I thought about it for the last 4 months since you brought that up the first time. And I'm like, gosh, is Vandy going to win more games than Colorado this year? It's not that crazy.
What is the realistic expectation? I know Deion's going to tell you, hey, we're playing for a Big 12 championship. And I've heard some guys like Klatt that think they're going to be really good. They lost a ton, and they brought a ton in from the portal. I just don't know how that works. We saw it work sometimes for John Calipari at Kentucky, and then we saw some disaster seasons. And I think this being Shedeur and Shiloh's last season, I just don't know if Deion's going to be coaching again next year. I know he says he's going to be long-term. I just don't know if I believe it. And I don't know how many Colorado fans are going to want him if he goes 4-8 again this year. But I think 4 is kind of the number there. I think you're getting value under the 5.5.
The underrated thing, too, is the loss of Sean Lewis. That move and what went down in December or November, where all of a sudden Deion's like, the best thing about my team, I'm just gonna abandon that. I don't know that they're gonna be able to call offensive plays. I
think the first month of the season, you were looking at Sean Lewis as maybe the Broyles Award winner last year. They opened 3-0 because their offense was popping, and as good as Shedeur and Travis Hunter were, and Travis got hurt in the Colorado State game. Everybody was talking about Sean Lewis.
And, go figure. He ends up getting a head coaching gig at San Diego State. And
he's in a better spot now. So that 1-year bridge really did work out for him.
Yeah, the Kent State to Colorado OC move, everybody's kind of looking at it going dude, what are you doing? Yeah. And, he has definitely made it a better move for himself. Okay, last one for you. And it's not gambling related. You can make it gambling related if you want to, but this is more of just kind of a big picture thing since you are the most LA person I know, I think, with the exception of my cousin who's lived there for a really long time. But USC. You guys talked to Bruce Feldman about this, but I'm curious what your take is on Lincoln Riley, considering that it feels like he has zero momentum going into year 3 after he's been struggling in recruiting. He's getting called out by his former AD. He's getting outed for trying to duck the LSU matchup. Like, what do you make of him going into this season, and what do you think his next 5 years look like?
Kind of when you look overall at the body of work in 2 years, I mean, it's better than what you got consistently from Clay Helton. I mean, 11-3. I don't think they were that good, and they ended up getting exposed at the end of the year against Utah. But you had a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback and 11 wins in year 1. It's a good year. It's a good solid A. But then you back it up 8-5, and you don't think the defense can be any worse, and they give it 35 points per game. D'Anton Lynn comes in now, Anthony Lynn's kid. He is well respected. I think the defense has got to be better. You've got Barry Alexander and Eric Gentry and some guys to build it around. I just don't know what you're going to get offensively. I trust Lincoln Riley to get the offense right. I can't remember him ever having a bad quarterback. And Miller Moss, the small sample size we saw against Louisville, he goes 372 and 6 touchdowns. So, I don't think you're going to get that year or week in, week out. But Zachariah Branch is going to be really good. Didn't get enough touches, only 40 offensive touches last year, had just as many on special teams. Got to get the ball in his hands. And I think Woody Marks, transfer from Mississippi State, in that backfield is going to be really good. So I think the good for USC is there's not a lot of expectation going into this season. I mean, their win total is 7.5. It was 9.5 last year. Obviously goes under at 8-5. I think they're going to be favored in 8 games. I think they win 8 or 9. And I think if you're a USC fan in year 1 of the Big Ten, you can build on that.
The counterpoint, the doomsday scenario for USC is Lincoln Riley having this like 7-5 type season, which that'd be the under because I think it's 7.5.
Yeah, but I could see a 7-5.
Yeah, like if that happens, all this traveling in the Big Ten, like having to learn all these new teams and stuff, where it feels like you're kind of starting over, and he looks around and goes like, Why did I sign up to do this again? And then the Cowboys thing, the timing of that with Mike McCarthy that everybody's been talking about forever with Lincoln Riley. Like if that actually lines up to be able to happen, like I don't know what the odds would be of that scenario playing out, but it feels like it's better than 0.
Well, and I don't know like Lincoln Riley personally, like where he is on some different things, but talking to somebody that covered USC football last year, they said that the environment was more NFL. It was more Louis. It was more Prada. They were worried. NIL really, really took over that program. At least this is what he told me. And, after a loss in college football, it should hit these guys hard because, it's a little bit different when we're talking about 12-team playoff now. But back in the day, you lose a couple of games, you're out of it. I mean, for a team like USC, the expectation should be championship or bust. But those players were walking out, smiling, laughing. It was like the losses weren't that big of a deal. And you just hope that that's not the entire culture. It's not just about a money grab when it comes to USC. But, they've had some weird recruiting things going on recently with, verbals that have decided to do a 180 and go elsewhere. And I don't know. I mean, I like Lincoln Riley. I think it's a fun style to watch. The defense cannot be any worse. I know I said that last year. But I think it will be better, and we'll see. But I think 8 or 9 wins will get a little momentum going into 2025.
Yeah, that's why the Caleb Williams thing when he was crying after that game last year. I know I'm biased as a Bears fan, but like when Caleb Williams is like crying after a loss, I made fun of him for thinking like they still had playoff chances. But I'm like, at the same time, USC needs more of that. They need more guys that take it that seriously.
Right.
I think this is kind of a life or death deal as opposed to like, I got paid, whatever. Who really cares?
By the way, I do think Caleb Williams is going to be really good for the Bears. I really do. I know it is one of the more polarizing things, but with that said, I think Justin Fields was going to be good.
Yeah, I did too for a while. And then I realized, am I saying this because he looks cool on the internet? Or am I saying this because I think he can actually lead them to the places they want to go? And then the fact that the market was what it was a little bit tough to stomach of being like, oh yeah, okay, then they probably made the right decision in the long run. But I love Justin Fields. I want him to work out so badly, but my life as a Bears fan now, and you're not mocking me at all. Like as a Rams fan who's like seen his team, do the whole like, oh, we're going to get to a Super Bowl. We're going to win a Super Bowl. Like that whole thing, right? Like you're not coming from that place.
No. Look, I went a decade. Steven Jackson was one of the best running backs to never play in the postseason. I guess he played one game in the postseason for the Rams. But old number 39 from Oregon State, had such a great career. He would have been a Hall of Famer if those Rams teams would have been better. He played behind some awful offensive lines. My point is, like I can't remember the last time I missed a Rams game. Like I have seen every snap, every play for years and years and years. And I go back, I started getting Sunday Ticket in 1997. And so I suffered all of those years. And the worst Rams loss to me that I can remember was in the 2003 divisional game where Steve Smith walked it off in St. Louis against the Rams in overtime. Because I believe that Mark Bulger team, they would have matched up the next week with Atlanta, and Carolina ended up with Jake Delhomme going to the Super Bowl that year. But that was a tough one to stomach. But there was nothing like 1999 when the Rams won their first championship. I told you the Rams they're a third kid to me.
That would be like your strawberry wine football season, like just go back and just like such an innocent place, like everything seems so pure and fun, like the first time and all this, and you just long for those days sometimes.
But I'll tell you, maybe more fulfilling was the recent Super Bowl 56 where they beat the Bengals, because that playoff run, they smashed the Cardinals that first opener. They go to Tampa. They were dominating the game. Cam Akers fumbles on the goal line right before half. Brady leads this amazing comeback. And then, final possession, game tied. Stafford hits Cooper Kupp on that amazing, and they end up, Matt Gay kicks field goal. They win. They go on NFC Championship. If San Fran holds on to an interception, that game's over. They're able to come back, win that. That was so fulfilling, because where I am in life, before that season started, I said, if you can give me one Rams Super Bowl in the rest of my lifetime, I'll take it, the championship. And I went that entire postseason without having a sip during a game, which is amazing for me. Yeah.
Dude, you got to get like sunflower seeds or something like that to calm the nerves.
I paced nonstop. I've got my basement that I watch all the Rams games in. That's all I did. And I've had people, they're like, well, why aren't you just sober? Because I'm a superstitious guy. Why aren't you just sober for Rams games moving forward? And I hadn't tried it since, and they haven't really had a lot of success since. So maybe I should go back to that. I don't know.
There we go. Okay, I probably won't. Last one for you. Probably won't be sober at karaoke next week. You did Big Papa last year. What's the play this year?
Well, I didn't plan on doing Big Papa. I know that's more of y'all's thing, and I'm trying to remember how that went down. I know Barrett Sallee is really big into that. I had a guy that was with us. We had gone to another party before where we saw you guys at. You told us where you were going to be. I didn't plan on going over there. I went to another place called Pushing Daisies, a little tequila bar across the street. And the guy said, I told him, I said, if you can find Big Papa, I will come do it. And the next thing I know, I got a text, it's queued up, it's ready to go. So I ran over there, kind of butchered that, but I'll definitely hang out with you guys this year. Looking forward to it. And we'll see what happens. California love this time, maybe. I don't know. Regulate.
We go from Biggie to Tupac. Is that allowed? Statute of limitations. It's up. It's all good.
I embrace and love both. Like most white men my age, the eternal debate on who was the best rapper, Biggie or Tupac. I love both. So,
spoken like a true LA guy through and through. Love it, man. Hey, looking forward to seeing you guys next week in Dallas. Appreciate you doing this, man.
Yeah, and last year, remember we had Barclays vodka on set. We were giving out bottles of vodka. We've got some really cool surprises for guests this year.
So Charles giving out the vodka on set.
No. I don't think that's going to happen. Yeah, this is going to be bigger and better, though. I'm telling you, Connor, you're going to love it.
That's a tease, man. That's a tease. Lance, appreciate it, man.
Absolutely. Always fun.